are pleased to welcome you to our third virtual recovery series. Today's presentation, we've got three great speakers for you here today, and we're excited to have this opportunity to get together in December before the holidays to help you learn a little bit about bettering yourself, helping your loved ones and clients, especially after the challenging year that we've had. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors. Again, we've got the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services who are supporting this series, and the Cardinal Health Foundation. So we're going to get started this morning with a recovery story, and I'm very pleased that we have Lynette joining us this morning to share her story. She's got a very beautiful background for you all, so I'm going to hand it over to Lynette.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank the Board Association and for inviting me to participate in this event. I'm very, very excited and honored to be a small part of today. So it's funny, when I'm asked to share my recovery story, I always wonder, what do they want to hear? What's the most important? Quite frankly, I only have a small amount of time and I love to talk. So the challenge will be to get what I hope is something that you can take with you, and I can do it in the right amount of time and appropriately. So basically, first I want to say my name is Lynette, and I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, which for me means I haven't used drugs or alcohol since May 4th of 2007. And as they say in my recovery program, I have been a member of the No Matter What Club. And that means no matter what happens in my life, good, bad, or indifferent, I choose not to use drugs or alcohol just for today. So very grateful for that. And that means that not only am I able to be here with you today to share my recovery story, it's allowed me to continue to do the things that I love, which are dance, be with my family, become a wife and a stepmom, and maintain my job at the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services for the last 17 years, and to use that opportunity as well as my recovery to become a recovery advocate in the community here in Franklin County, as well as the state of Ohio and nationally, to fight for people with substance use disorder, struggling with the disease, and wanting to find recovery. In essence, I am really grateful for the disease of addiction in my life because it has given my life meaning. The gratitude that I feel for the second chance that I got propels me every day to do more for folks like me. My journey started, I say, when I was a kid. Like many people, I came from a great family, but we struggled. My father struggled with alcohol use disorder, and I didn't realize at the time about a disease or the family disease or any of that. I just knew that there was always a lot of chaos and confusion in my home. I was an only child, so I spent a lot of time by myself. And I also spent a lot of time hearing them argue and my parents, fighting. And it was a lot of anxiety and chaos. I do remember always wanting to make sure that I did the best I could and didn't cause problems so that it wouldn't make things worse. And I look back now and realize that probably is one of the reasons I'm a perfectionist today. Everything has to be perfect. I have to control everything, not only within me, but outside of myself. So it's one of the things that I have to work on, to not worry about being perfect all the time, just doing the best that I can. But anyway, as I continued throughout my life, I did realize in my after high school and into college, I struggled a lot because as an only child and being in an environment where I always wanted to fit in and be a part of things, I got into, some things I didn't need to. And I struggled through college, eventually got kicked out of college, but was too embarrassed to go home. So I stayed around and was able to be reinstated and graduated by the skin of my teeth. But also during that period, I also learned that my family had a disease. I had seen a doctor. I was having some physical problems, and that doctor, because they couldn't find any physical reason for the issues, they sent me to a therapist. And part of that process, sharing my story, I was referred to a workshop about the family disease of what they called at that time alcoholism. We call it addiction today because regardless of the form of the drug, whether it's liquid or powder or solid or shot, snorted, or smoked, it is a drug. And but I learned at that time that one person's illness can affect the entire family. And so that's why even today, even though I'm a person in recovery, I fight for people whose loved ones are struggling with this disease, because we want to make sure that family members get the support and the help that they need as well. But anyway, once I learned that, I did start going to a 12-step fellowship for families and friends of people with the disease of alcoholism, because I learned that I wasn't crazy. I was just a victim of an illness, and my family had to recover. And unfortunately, my mom never really took to the program, but I did learn a lot about the disease. I think because I was still young and having fun, I didn't stick with that program. I continued on with my life, and throughout my life had varying degrees of experimenting, using drugs and alcohol, partying too much, getting in trouble, getting pulled over with DUIs, all kinds of things. Grateful that I never hurt myself or anyone else during that period of time. But suffice it to say, over the next many, many years, the disease of addiction actually manifested itself in my life really, really in a lot of ways as I continued to flail around and do what I could to continue my life. One of the things I've learned about the disease of addiction is that for everybody, it's different. For some people, it hits them hard, fast, they can't function. For other people like me, I was able to function day to day. I went to work. I always, one of the things I learned in my family was that no matter what chaos was happening in our house, we always made sure we looked good. The house looked good. We looked good. My hair was always done, makeup, clothes, all of that. That's one of the things I learned early on. So I always tried to look and act like everything was fine, while inside, everything was a hot mess. So I continued on with that for many, many years. And I kind of followed in my mom's footsteps. My mom worked for the state of Ohio. She worked for the Department of Developmental Disabilities for probably 35 years. And I ended up working in that same department later on after she had retired, but I worked in that field for a long time, for about 10 years. But I was still struggling with figuring out what I wanted in my life. And so I eventually left that position. I was involved in dance and theater, locally. And after doing some work in the rape prevention field here in Columbus, I moved to Atlanta, partially because this was around the time when the crack epidemic was really blowing up in our nation and in Central Ohio. And I was introduced to it. And something in the back of my mind said, this is really dangerous. But unfortunately, I had already started down that path of active addiction. And the only thing I knew to do was leave. So I left town. I decided I'm going to move to Atlanta where I can get away from this. That was my thinking. But of course, we all know no matter where you go, there you are. But I did move to Atlanta and got involved in dance and theater and loved it. Focused my life on doing that while working as a temp during the day to pay the bills. After 3 years, I had to come back to Ohio because my mother had got cancer, and my father had passed by then, and I had to come back and take care of her. And she eventually passed away of lung cancer, and I was taking care of her. But the one thing that happened as soon as I came back to Ohio, I picked right back up where I left off with my with smoking crack. And so I was nursing my terminally ill mother. At the same time, I was dealing with the crack habit. It was the hardest time in my life. I don't know how I got through it. Once she passed, I was an only child, so I inherited the house, her savings, the car, all of this. So I had to deal with getting all that squared away. And I spent most of the next year and a half using crack, and ended up, the short version is I smoked up the entire inheritance. I had sold the house intending to go back to Atlanta to continue my life. I never made it out of Ohio. I never made it out of Columbus because of my addiction. I basically lost everything I owned, including the cat and the dog that I had. All of my possessions were packed up in a U-Haul. Once I sold the house, packed up my stuff in a U-Haul. I still couldn't leave. I was still connected to using getting high, and ended up keeping the U-Haul for 3 months instead of turning it in. And all of my things were confiscated, and I haven't seen them since. So I share that to talk about the devastation this disease can cause in one's life, no matter what's going on. The tragedy of my mom's death, illness and death, wasn't enough to stop me from using. As a matter of fact, I used that as a crutch to deal with it, unfortunately. However, after that happened, I had to start over. So I continued working as a temp, found a rooming house to live in when I shared a bathroom with 3 other people. It was rough, but I did it, and I worked as a temp for 6 months, continued on until I applied for another position with the state, this time with the Department of Mental Health at the time. And by God's grace, I got that position, and that was 17 years ago or so. And I continued using for a few years after that. Even though I did try to stop, I couldn't. I eventually ran into someone who was in recovery. I was out partying one night with a friend and met some guys who were out there hanging out, to pick up girls, and met a guy, and we hit it off, and he confided in me that he was in recovery, had been in recovery for 15 months. And we started hanging out because I enjoyed being with him. And he introduced me to a lot of people in his recovery program. He was in a 12-step fellowship. I went to meetings with him to support him because of my experience with the 12-step program I had been to for families and friends earlier in my life. I was familiar with that, and I supported that, right? So I went, and I felt comfortable, and everybody was very welcoming and loving. And we dated for 3 years. And during that time period, he never said, "You have a problem." I continued to use. He said, "You do what you do. I'm going to continue my recovery." So anyway, I continued on until I hit my own, what they call bottom. Even though I was working full time and everything, I continued to use until my using got out of hand. And I came to a position where my employer learned of my drug use and gave me an ultimatum: you either go to treatment or you resign. And so I went to treatment through our EAP program, was able to find a recovery program and haven't looked back since. And there are two things that I take away the most from that story. The first is because I had met someone in recovery and seen how life could be, you know, other people enjoying life without the use of drugs, I saw hope. I saw hope of a different life. And a lot of times we don't get that. Folks that are struggling don't get to see hope. And the second thing is I was blessed enough to have an employer who gave me the opportunity to do something different, to send me to treatment. And I had health care that paid for that treatment. And again, all of us don't get that opportunity. So those are two things that I fight for today, so that folks who are struggling can find hope and they can have health care and employers that support them in their recovery. So that's what I'm most grateful for. Oh, and by the way, that guy that I met, we've been married for 13 years now. We'll be celebrating our anniversary on December 31st. That's him. I think he may be on here, but that's Rodney. You know, I have to give him his props. He's been in recovery for 17 years and I'm always grateful to him because he allowed God to show me another way to live. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Lynette, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for everything that you do for the recovery community in Ohio. We appreciate it very much. It is my pleasure to now introduce our next speaker. We've got Director Alicia Nelson with us from the Recovery Ohio office. As you all know, Recovery Ohio has been leading the charge in our state to help support individuals and families that are impacted by mental health and substance use disorders. So I want to thank Alicia for joining us this morning and thank her for everything that she's doing, leading the Recovery Ohio office and supporting individuals in recovery, as well as all of her efforts related to the pandemic as well. I know she's been keeping busy. So Alicia, we appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to join us today.
I am glad to be here, and I'm going to try to get my video on to say hello to everyone. Thank you for that story, Lynette. It always is a joy to hear your story and just to just hear that hope and that inspiration for hope and how important that is in all of our lives. And particularly this year and now. So always good to hear that. I'm going to share a few things about Recovery Ohio. Today, I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay, Liz, and some slides. So I'm going to go off video, but I'm happy to come back if we are going to do some discussion later on video. So I'll do that now. If I can figure this out, I'm getting better at the sharing of the screen, I think. All right. So as Liz mentioned, I'm a member of the Recovery Ohio team. I couldn't do this alone. There are 4 of us who work every day to try to support the work and the great work that you all do across the state and for our state in supporting families and those who need support with mental health and addiction. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do this work. Governor DeWine had reached out and wanted to do something new to help those struggling with mental health or substance use disorders, by bringing the state together through this Recovery Ohio initiative, his first night in office. We really set a precedent in terms of, just the elevation of focus on these issues. In supporting communities with mental health and substance use disorders and thinking broadly about it. I know that there have been a number of initiatives around opiates or alcohol or suicide, and he really wanted to see what it would look like to kind of bring these conversations together and understand how multifaceted all of us are, and making sure that we work together to address them. I'm also grateful for Sherry Walters and the rest of the Recovery Ohio Advisory Council who has put together the Recovery Ohio report. If you haven't seen it already, please take a moment to do so. They laid out 75 recommendations that we've been working hard at over the last 2 years. So a fast 2 years, but I'm grateful for that. Today, I want to spend some time talking about our COVID-19 response, and I want to introduce this as the theme of today's conversation with you, is that we're all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. I want to talk about this from a Recovery Ohio lens related to mental health and addiction. I want to talk about understanding equity and disparity as well as a part of that. I've had the opportunity to now co-chair one of the strike force groups on minority health. And so to me, a lot of these things are starting to and continue to be related. And so love to have a conversation with all of you about that. What we know is that in times of crisis, behavioral health is going to be one of the most seen outcomes from any crisis. So whether it's a pandemic, a tornado, any of those things. And I know Ohio has experienced a lot of crisis and trauma over the last couple years, from the Dayton shooting, the tornadoes, through the droughts our farm community experienced, to now what we're all experiencing in COVID-19. And understanding that, in these times we would see people who may have never experienced stress and anxiety in this way before experience that stress and anxiety, as well as those who have experienced stress and anxiety or mental health or substance use disorders, have increased needs for recovery supports in understanding through these really difficult times. We knew that, and so we made sure, and we've tried to do our best work around making behavioral health a part of the COVID-19 response. And I'm really proud of the things that have occurred, and I'll talk a little bit about those. But really, we couldn't have a COVID-19 response without a behavioral health response. And I think that has been made true in a number of ways, and I'll talk about that as well. What we know from the addiction perspective is that we had seen a slight increase of unintentional drug overdoses in 2019. We saw a number of people experiencing overdose death through the use of or the incorporation of fentanyl, similar to what we've seen in previous years. Most concerning, we saw increases in the rates of African American males and females, and I want to talk about that for a little bit too. But when we then went into 2020 and you overlay this pandemic, we saw some very disturbing numbers. And this is just a chart from Harm Reduction Ohio, who took the Ohio Department of Health's data and kind of charted it out. And you see in 2020 that May, June, and July were very, May particularly was the deadliest month for drug overdoses in Ohio's history. And we see numbers all the time, but it really calls everybody to continue to push forward, because these are people, these are families that have been impacted, and we had to continue to push forward in our efforts to address the surge. And then you see what happened in June and July. Fortunately, and this chart doesn't show that, we've seen some decreases in our data, at least preliminarily, for this ending months of the year, in hopes that that trend will continue as the coroner death data is then, is solidified and confirmed. but we still have to keep our foot on the gas when it comes to overdose deaths in our communities. At the same time, we saw suicide rates climb, and we saw local groups across the state really want to, increase awareness of this behavioral health support system that you all work so hard to provide, and make sure that people knew of its availability. And so we have been working but also proud to see all of our Ohioans really rallying behind each other in these very trying times, to support and be there for each other in this work. But we also knew we had to lay some groundwork for the response and make sure that we were being supportive of the efforts that were happening at the ground level and having very visible, very accessible support services out for community members who may have been experiencing these symptoms of stress and anxiety that they've never experienced before, or like I said earlier, those of us who may already struggle with mental illness or substance use disorder who need that additional support. And so we've set up things like the COVID Care Line. I'm leaving this on the screen. If you haven't already shared this, please share this out with the communities. We've had thousands of calls so far. It's available 24 hours a week, 7 days a week. And it really is meant to be whatever a person needs at that time as it relates to behavioral health. And if it's something else, they try their best to link to that too, and connect to some of the other care lines that are out there about questions about COVID or whatever that need is, just to be that listening ear. So please share that information out. And if you need it, please know that you can call it too. And the support is there for you as you continue to work in this atmosphere. And we all should kind of take note of that number. We also started Ohio Strive for 5 Challenge. This came out from the local community. We thought it was such a great idea that we would kind of do the same for all Ohioans. And it's really about checking in with people. The isolation rates that we're seeing in all of us, but particularly our older adults and older adult mental health is something that we all should be very concerned about. I've seen studies where older adults will go weeks without talking to another human other than those who are providing support services or meal delivery drop off. It's really important that we are connecting with each other, particularly in these winter months as we wait for those warmer months to come back around. It's dark, it's gloomy, it's cold, and it's hard to continue. But when you have someone who you can look forward to talking to and connecting with, it just makes the day better. So those are important conversations that I hope that you all continue to have. Some of the other things that I don't have a slide for, but just want to make mention of before I talk about naloxone is the work around telehealth. Thank you all for adapting so quickly to the telehealth guidance and rules and the things that have been developed in this short of period of time is nothing short of amazing. I'm really appreciative of the hard work at the local level and at our provider levels and in our recovery communities for being adaptive. I know that there is work still to do. There is still concerns about group gatherings and how important those 12-step meetings, as Lynette talked about earlier, in our community support network and our family support network is to our recovery. And so, we continue to work with you all to get creative and make the services available that we know communities need. These aren't optional. These are important services that we all need to take advantage of and have the opportunity to take advantage of, even in these times where we have to be socially distant. So we are continuing to work on those. Other opportunities where we saw, ways to get creative is around naloxone. House Bill 341, is the governor signing that into law. It is about getting naloxone out in a variety of new ways and making sure that those who don't have a terminal distributor's license can still pass out naloxone. I think from this bill, you'll start to see naloxone in vending machines. And I know a number of you have talked about, it should be everywhere. You see a defibrillator. And so you'll start to see these rescue kits and things that are all being paved because of, created because of this new bill and the passage of this new law. So I thank everyone who worked on that. Kind of going back to our theme, we're all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. I want to talk a little bit about what this means for disparity and equity in communities of color, and those of us, across the state who may have live in poverty or have other geographical challenges. I think that we've learned a lot about, we're all in this together, but, from where we sit, our experiences are not the same. And so we've talked a lot about COVID-19 resiliency, risk, and equity in this administration, really have started to work across agencies similar to the Recovery Ohio initiative, in that we bring agencies together to come up and try to solve complex problems and having real conversations about race and ethnicity. And in light of, on top of the pandemic and everything else that's going on in our world, we saw the death of George Floyd, and really the conversations that have come from this have been fruitful in our ability to really make change in this area. And so in COVID-19 and behavioral health, all of these things, again, tie together to me in that, we have to understand each individual is multifaceted, and the needs of each individual may be slightly different, and we have to understand that lens by which the person is coming from to be able to support them. We put out some guidance in this area, particularly the COVID-19 Minority Health Strike Force Blueprint really calls out racism as a public health crisis. And it talks about, from a behavioral health lens, the trauma that is experienced as a part of those conversations, and really the impact on mental health. We really need to unpack that. I know that that's partially COVID-19 related, but mostly, an historical, complication or problem that we all need to have real conversations about and address. And so we are excited that, if you see a silver lining in all of this, that the conversations are happening. The governor has since released his plan of action to advance equity. And we're also, if any of you all know, Jamie Carmichael, excited to have her join in the ranks of the Ohio Department of Health's team to look at social determinants of health and behavioral health as a part of that for communities all across the state, no matter who you are. Lastly, kind of still keeping with this theme, we're all in this same storm, but not in the same boat. I want to talk a little bit about you to close us out. We're in this together. You're in this with us. And we really need to understand how this is all impacting us as providers, as administrators, as policymakers, whatever our seat, however we fit into this puzzle. Dealing with pandemic-related stress and anxieties have to be at our forefront of our minds too. I always think about that airline attendant who talked about putting your mask on first and then helping others put their mask on, and it is true here. We really need to think about taking breaks from media. We have to take care of our bodies, set routines for ourselves, get dressed, do the things that'll make us all, get through this a little bit better, and continue to find those reasons to be grateful. And remind us of all the things that we tell other people we need to take and do ourselves for ourselves to just stay as healthy as we can, despite all of the things that are happening around us. I do think there's a lot to be grateful for, and I thank you all for the work that you do and continue to do to support the state, to implement the work that needs to be done, and understand and continue to keep the state on our toes as we try to work with you to address community needs. So with that, I will come back to you. I'm going to try to find my screen. I'm happy to take questions later today, I think is the plan.
Thank you so much, Director Nelson, for joining us today and sharing that wonderful information. We will have time for questions at the end. I'm not sure if you'll be able to stick around, but if you are, we can have people put those in the Q&A box. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. Ryan Gottfredson is a mental success coach and cutting-edge leadership consultant, author, trainer, and researcher. He helps improve organizations, leaders, teams, and employees by improving their mindsets. Ryan is currently a leadership and management professor at California State University-Fullerton. He holds a Ph.D. in organizational behavior and human resources from Indiana State University, and is the author of Success Mindsets, the Key to Unlocking Greater Success in Your Life, Work, and Leadership. So again, we will have time for questions at the end. If you have any during Ryan's presentation, please put those in the Q&A box. Ryan, floor is yours.
All right, great. It is so good to be with all of you. Thank you for joining, and I really have been looking forward to this opportunity to be with you here today. So let me go ahead and pull up my slides here. Give me just a moment to do that. Let me try, make sure I've got my settings up, because I am going to show you a quick video during this, and I just want to make sure I have the settings up. All right, here we go. Great. So as was mentioned here, I'm a leadership professor at Cal State Fullerton and a leadership researcher. I also work with organizations to develop their leaders, and that may be getting you to think, why am I here talking to folks that are interested in learning about recovery? Well, in my research and my consulting work, is I focus a lot about mindsets, and we're going to be talking about mindsets. It's going to be a part of this, but the thing that's been really interesting to me is, as I have done research on mindsets, one of the things that I have learned is that our mindsets are literally dealing with the wiring of our brain, and that the wiring in our brain actually does affect our recovery. And so we're going to be diving into this because I've got a premise and I've got a purpose for today. So my premise for today is that when we understand how our mind works, we can become empowered to improve our psychological health. And as we improve our psychological health, we will also improve our resilience and our success, however we might define that. That might be success from recovery. It might be success in life, right? So my purpose for today is to help you better understand how your mind works and provide you with recommendations for enhancing your psychological health so that you can become more resilient and successful. And also, I think that this information will really help you to help others to become empowered, to enhance their psychological health, and also enhance their resilience and their success. So that's where we're headed today. That's where we're going. And to get us into this, as I mentioned, I want to show you a video clip here that I think will get us started on the right foot. It's just a 3-minute video. So let's go ahead and watch this.
One question that conscious leaders ask themselves over and over is, where am I? To support leaders in locating themselves as they ask the question, where am I? We offer this tool, a line, a simple black line. At any moment, all leaders and all people are either above the line or below the line. Our location describes how we're being with what is occurring in our life right now. If we're above the line, we are open, curious, and committed to learning. If we are below the line, we are closed, defensive, and committed to being right. Stop right now and simply ask yourself, where am I? In this now moment, am I above the line or below the line? Typically, when people are below the line, they believe certain things about the world. For example, they believe there is not enough. It could be that there's not enough money, or time, or space, or energy, or love. People below the line also believe that their story about the situation is right. People below the line also believe that there is a threat out there. Something or someone is threatening their desire for approval, control, or security. And people below the line see the situation as serious. The deeper below the line they are, the more serious things look. People below the line tend to behave certain ways as well. They tend to cling to an opinion, find fault and blame, gossip, explain, rationalize and justify, get overwhelmed, and avoid conflict or pursue conflict for the sake of winning. When people are above the line, they believe that learning and growing are more important than being right. They believe that all people and circumstances are their allies, here for their growth. They believe that from a distance, almost everything is funny. People above the line live in curiosity, listen deeply, speak unarguably, question all their beliefs, and live a life of play. Now, knowing what you know about being above or below the line, where are you? One thing to know as you consider this question: we are hardwired to go below the line. Literally, our brain is programmed to perceive threat, and when it does, a chemical cocktail courses through our veins, and we go below the line. This reaction was designed to help us survive in the presence of a real threat to our physical survival. An issue for modern-day leaders is that often our brains can't tell the difference between a threat to our physical survival and a threat to our ego or identity. We react and get defensive when we experience a threat to our ego. So in many ways, being below the line is natural and normal. But when we are below the line, we're not in a state, literally brain state, of high creativity, collaboration, innovation, and relational connection. We're simply trying to survive. Leaders today can't thrive if they're in survival mode. So the first activity of conscious leadership is location, location, location. In this now moment, where am I? Telling ourselves and others the truth about our current location begins the great conversation.
All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that. And I of course, there's a little bit of an oversimplification because it's giving us a below the line and above the line, but I think that's just a good way to gauge. And we could even ask ourselves, where am I at today? Am I below the line? Am I in survival mode? Or am I above the line? Am I in thrival mode? Well, and I thought it was interesting how it talks about how our brain is actually wired to stay below the line. And that if we want to be above the line, we've really got to be intentional about getting there. We've got to implement different activities, take different action, which we will be talking about to be able to get up there and stay up there. But where we currently are, whether we're below or above that line, is dictated by several factors. One being our external factors. Our external factors, if there's a threat in front of us, of course, that's going to drive us to want to be below the line. There's also some internal factors that go on that may dictate where we are at. Now, some examples of other external factors that we may be experiencing right now. I mean, it was just a little chilling to see some of those statistics that were presented about the effect that COVID-19 has had on drug use and even deaths as a result of that. So, and this holiday season may be a really challenging time for people in general, let alone during the middle of a global pandemic. So these are surely some external factors that are likely kind of pulling us down below the line. But where we're going to be going here is, what can we do with our internal factors to better navigate our external world? How can we enhance our psychological health such that we become more resilient, that we could stay above the line, or we could get there more frequently and stay above that line for longer periods of time? So I'm going to present to you a situation, and then I'm going to list a variety of different ways people can respond to that same situation. And all we're asking the question here is, who is more psychologically healthy in this situation? So the situation is just when really difficult thoughts or feelings arise. So here's a couple of ways that people can respond. One person can respond in such a way that when these difficult thoughts or feelings arise, they try to distract themselves. But another person, when those thoughts and feelings arise, they may make room for those difficult thoughts and feelings. What about when these difficult thoughts or feelings arise, we criticize ourselves? But other people, they may seek a broader perspective, that these thoughts and feelings aren't me, there's other things that are going on. There's another couple ways. When thoughts and feelings, difficult thoughts and feelings arise, we can't stop these thoughts. They just kind of get on replay and we can't get out of that replay. Whereas other people might be able to help them let these thoughts and feelings come and go. What about when difficult thoughts or feelings arise? Do these trap you in inaction, or are you able to continue to take action? And when these difficult thoughts or feelings arise, is it better to seek relief in that moment, even if it means sacrificing your values, or is it better to despite the difficulty, be unwilling to compromise those values? So I think we'd probably all be in agreement, if we were in a live audience, that the options on the right are much more effective than the options on the left when it comes to dealing with these difficult thoughts or feelings. And all of these things that I'm bringing up are different ways to think about psychological health. And the basic idea is, if we know that those on the right, those that respond like those on the right, are more psychologically healthy, a big question is, how do we shift? How do we get there? If we see some of these A elements in us, how do we eventually get to the place where we're more like B? And if you're feeling like, man, I see a lot of these A's in me, like, welcome to the club. This is something that I think all of us struggle with to a certain degree. But how do we make the shifts if we want to? Well, I think it's really helpful to recognize that there are two different types of development. One form of development is horizontal development. This is adding more knowledge, skills, and competencies to us. But there's also vertical development. This is elevating our thinking capacity to better navigate more complex and uncertain environments. Let me bring these to life just a little bit more. So when we think about horizontal development, really the focus of horizontal development is doing more. It's like adding an app onto the iPad. We're broadening our functionality. We're broadening the things that we could do because of the new skills, our new competencies. this is surely not a bad form of development. It's a necessary form of development, but it's the one that I think is emphasized the most, which I will come back to here in just a minute. And we can't overlook vertical development. Vertical development is different in its focus in that it's not about doing more, it's about being better. So rather than adding an app onto the iPad, vertical development is about upgrading the iPad or upgrading that iPad's operating systems. I mean, how many times have you maybe tried to help somebody help somebody horizontally develop by teaching them something new, giving them new skills, giving them new competencies. And even though they kind of got the new app onto their iPad, their operating system was such that it really couldn't take advantage of this new app. In fact, I've got a 6-year-old iPad that's downstairs that my children play with, and it's to the point where we can't add any more apps or else it slows down. And it's even to the point where most of the apps that we want to add onto it just don't even work with this old operating system. And so when it comes to us and becoming more psychologically healthy, we probably need a little bit of both of these. But let me dive into this even further. I mean, if I was to ask you the question, which is easier? What would you say? Is horizontal development or vertical development easier? Well, horizontal is easier. Any of us can learn knowledge, skills, and competencies. It's just not everybody that elevates their thinking capacity to be able to navigate more complex and uncertain environments. What is more commonly focused on? Well, that would be horizontal development. The majority of personal development really is horizontal development. Now, horizontal development isn't bad. But if we do it without the perspective of vertical development, then that horizontal development likely won't pay forward its benefits. Because I mean, really one of the things that we're going to be doing with this presentation is I'm going to be giving you some knowledge and hopefully some activities that you can engage in. Now, that is only going to benefit you to the degree to which you use that to then vertically develop. But we're also going to talk about diving into what does that even mean to vertically develop as we go along here. Because we need to ask the question, will horizontal development get us to psychological health? And the reality is that it can help us get there, but it won't get us there in and of itself. So then the question becomes, we go about vertically developing so that we could be more psychological healthy, that when difficult thoughts and feelings arise, we make room for it. We seek broader perspectives. We let it come and go. We continue to take action. And despite difficulty, we're unwilling to compromise our values. I mean, as I was listening to the recovery story here at the beginning of this with Lynette, I just kind of felt like I've seen this vertical development shift in her, right? And I think that she would probably agree. It'd be interesting if she sticks around, if we have any questions, if she could comment on to what degree has she vertically had this vertical development. So she shifted from these elements on the left to these elements on the right throughout her life. And my guess is she's been able to stay sober largely because she has vertically developed. And that is that vertical development that needs to come first. On vertical development, I think we need to understand our mind. And I'm going to try to present, our mind is incredibly complex. I'm going to present a simplification of our mind, but it's one that is really helpful. So there's three large, and Lynette commented in, at least to me, is absolutely. So thank you for commenting in on that, Lynette. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts there. So there's three major brain regions within our mind. There is the reptilian brain. This is at the top of our spinal column. And this is where all of the information that our body sends to our brain goes through. This is the first place where information goes. Then the next step up is our mammalian brain. This is our limbic system. And then beyond that is our new brain, or our human brain. It's also called our neocortex. Now, each of these have a very different role to play generally. Again, this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's a helpful framework. Our reptilian brain is in this red portion here, is in charge of body sensations and our impulses. So if we go outside and it's cold and we start to shiver, that's our reptilian brain. If we are walking down a dark alley and we see, let's just say, a hooded figure, right? Our body is going to instinctively react to that in trying to preserve us, right? So that's where our reptilian brain operates. Our mammalian brain is largely in charge of our emotions and our feelings and our implicit memories. So this is where information is coming in here, but we're making some meaning for it here in our mammalian brain. And then our human brain, or our new brain, this is in charge of our thought, our verbal expression, and our emotional intelligence. This is really where our rationality largely resides, right? So these are our three major brain regions. Now, I'm going to present you with the situation here, and I'm going to ask you a question related to this. So the situation, just imagine that you receive some constructive criticism. Now, I guess the question that I have for you is, the processing of constructive criticism generally tap into multiple brain regions. So is there an instinctual reaction to this? Do emotions arise? And do you try to process this rationally, right? Because constructive criticism is kind of interesting, because it's like you're giving news, maybe about me or what I did, and I'm supposed to think that it is good, right? And that's a really rational perspective. Now, when I ask groups, how do you typically respond to constructive criticism, there's of course a wide range of answers. Some people are quick to get defensive. Other people, oh, this is fantastic. I love constructive criticism. Bring it on, right? So what would lead one person to see constructive criticism as being a bad thing, another person is seeing it as a good thing? Well, that brings us to the next aspect of the mind that we need to understand, is we have, our brain is made up of neuroconnections. And out of the millions of neuroconnections in our brain, only a really small subset of that are neuroconnections that span all three of these major brain regions. These are called long-range neuroconnections. Their scientific term is cortico-cortical neuroconnections. And these are effectively the circuit board for the brain. In fact, neurologists call it our global neuronal workspace. They are what is in control of the brain, and their job, and really the term, another term that I think is really helpful to use for this, is that these are our mindsets. And I'm going to kind of play that out here in just a minute. But their overarching job is to integrate the mind, integrate these three major brain regions so that they work effectively together. Now I want to talk about why I think it's okay that we call these mindsets. Mindsets are the mental lenses that we wear that shape how we see the world. And depending upon how we see the world, shapes how we think about the world, shapes how we learn in our, shapes how we behave in our world. So going back to this example of constructive criticism, it's our mindsets, or these long-range neuroconnections, that may be telling us that this constructive criticism is either bad or that it is good. Let me show you how this works here, recognizing the three major brain regions. So I don't know if you knew this, but our body sends our brain 11 million bits of information per second. I mean, our brain is consistently getting so much information, but our brain can only fully process 40 bits of information per second. So for example, my guess is you've been listening to me, that you have not been conscious of your toes, right? For all of this time, your toes have been sending signals to your brain saying, I am here and we're okay. But you just have not processed that, right? Your brain has filtered that information out. Well, the first job of our mindsets is to filter what information is important to us and bring that into the brain, because we can't take it all in. And this is primarily housed in our reptilian brain. This is the filter here. And then when this information comes in, we need to do something with it. So we pass it along these neural connections to the mammalian brain, where we interpret this information in a unique way. And we're going to pull upon our implicit memories in order for that to happen. So one of the things that stuck out to me about Lynette's story, if I remember this correctly, is she always felt the pressure to kind of be the bright spot within her family and kind of be always seen as doing good. And that's kind of caused her maybe some events that led to that at a young age to develop that type of an implicit memory, so that when she meets a difficult situation, she may be inclined to want to look good, right? Or be the shining kind of model or example in those situations. So that is and this is primarily housed in our mammalian brain, where we're tapping into our implicit memories about things that have gone on in the past to make sense of our current situation. Well, then, in terms of our third subarcing job of our mindsets, is once we filter this information in and interpret it, we then need to process it. Well, what's going to happen here is we're going to activate, or our mindsets are going to activate different elements of who we are so that we could respond appropriately based upon the information absorbed and how it is interpreted. And sometimes we do these better than other times, in a more healthy way than other times, depending upon the quality of our mindsets. Now, this third subarcing job, activating the different elements of who we are to respond appropriately to the situation that we're in, it can tap into all brain regions, but it doesn't always. And we're going to get into this. But one of the things that I think is really important to point out is this entire process of filtering information, interpreting it, and then using information in such a way to respond to our environment generally happens non-consciously. So when it's really helpful to think about this and bring this to life when we understand that there's a difference between an integrated mind and a disintegrated mind. So in an integrated mind, these long-range neural connections are working really well to such a degree that all three major brain regions are playing a healthy role. They are working effectively together. In a disintegrated mind, what generally happens is the reptilian brain and the mammalian brain are operating on overdrive. And these long-range neural connections are not working very effectively. And because the mammalian and reptilian brains are operating on overdrive, it overpowers the human brain and its ability to step in, regulate the mammalian and reptilian brains, right? So if we get defensive when we receive constructive criticism, what is often happening here is our human brain, our rational brain, is having a hard time stepping in saying, look, no, you're not in danger. Let's just slow this down and let's use this information to benefit us, all right? That's what our human brain wants to do in those situations. But sometimes these long-range neural connections, our mindsets, they're just not working as well as they could. And so when we talk about psychological health, really what we're talking about is having a brain that is integrated. When we are less psychologically healthy, what is going on is our brain is disintegrated. So using this constructive criticism example, when we receive constructive criticism, we've got this disintegrated mind, we see this as valuable information, right? We're going to filter this in through our reptilian brain. Then we're going to pass this on to our mammalian brain, where we're likely to interpret this information as being a threat. And because it's a threat, we're going to get hyper aroused, and we're not going to allow that human brain to kick in. And therefore, because it's not kicking in, our natural reaction is to get defensive. And again, all of this is largely going to occur non-consciously. But in an integrated mind, we are going to also filter in this information. As we pass it on to the million brain, we're more likely to interpret this information as an opportunity to learn, particularly when our human brain is allowed to play more of a role, and our natural reaction in this instance is going to be more inclined to investigate this information that is being provided. So this is when all three of the brain regions are working effectively together. Disintegrated is when they aren't working as effectively together. So when we look at these different ways that we could respond to difficult thoughts or feelings, what we see on the right is these psychologically healthy responses really come from having an integrated mind. When we are responding more like these options on the left, that generally means that we've got some disintegration that has gone on. Now, I hope this is leading you to ask the question, what causes disintegration? And to me, this has been really interesting to learn about. And there's two primary ways our brain becomes disintegrated. One is our current culture. Like, let's just say our work environment, for example, is kind of a hostile, it's a competitive, it's a threatening work environment. The more and more we operate in that type of environment and in that type of a culture, our brain will become more and more disintegrated. Another factor, the other factor that leads to disintegration is really our life experience, but in particular, trauma. And this could be big T trauma or little t trauma. And I feel like even in Lynette's stories, you could see the fingerprints of trauma, of how she talked about her parents fighting when she was little. And I think she probably underplayed some of the emotions that rose in those situations. You see, when we experience trauma, our body's natural reaction, because what's going on is when we experience trauma, is we're feeling pain. Pain is occurring, and our body's natural reaction is to get rid of that pain, to stop feeling that pain. And one of the best ways our body does that, and it's an instinctive way, it's a mechanism, it is to limit the feelings that are occurring and not let them get to this human brain area. In fact, we want to push these feelings down as far as we can. So this is generally what happens. And I want to do a little exercise here before we go on. And I wish I could see all of you to be able to do this exercise. So I'm going to have to just trust that you do this with me. So what I want you to do for this exercise is I want you to sit up, kind of put your 2 feet on the ground, just get into a stable posture. And I want you to put, I'm going to show you my hands, but I actually want you to put your hands in your lap. Okay. Just relax here for a little bit. And what I want you to do is with one of your hands, I want you to make a fist. Okay. So make this fist, and I want you to tell this fist, as long as you stay closed, we stay safe. Okay. So your job, fist, is to stay closed, right? So make that fist. Now, what I want you to do with your offhand is I want you to use this hand to come in and open up that. Remember, this fist job is to stay closed. So just in your lap, just use this offhand and try to open that fist. I'll give you a few seconds to do this. Just kind of feel, what is your body feeling on the inside? What is your hand feeling? What is that feeling like? All right, you could stop. Now shake it out if you need to. And I even look at my hand and I see I've got fingerprint divots on my hand, right? There was a lot of resistance that was there. So just kind of pay attention to some of those feelings that were coursing through your body there. So shake it out a little bit. Get back to kind of an upright seated take a deep breath for a second, because we're going to do this again, but we're going to do it a little bit differently, okay? So what I want you to do is still with your hands in your lap is I want you to make that fist again, okay? This fist job is still the same. As long as you stay closed, we stay safe. Now, what I want you to do is with this offhand now, I want you to speak to this offhand and tell this offhand, we need you to be compassionate. We want you to be supportive. And your job is now to go greet that and support it, right? So I want you to now bring this offhand over and just support that fist. And tell this fist, thank you for keeping us safe. You have been doing a wonderful job. And as you do that, notice the feelings in your body. Notice your feelings around that fist. Now, if you're anything like most groups, the feeling that you got to begin with is you are really struggling to keep that fist closed. It's almost the harder you try to lift up the fingers, the more resistance, the more your muscles tensed up. But when you kind, compassionate hand come over and be supportive, I don't know about you, but it was a completely different experience. It's almost as if that fist wants to open naturally. And the reason why I bring up this example is because our fist is what happens when we go through trauma. Our fist is what keeps us safe. And it is a disintegrated state, but it is also one that has been keeping us safe. And that we should never try to pry this up. And I hope that my message here to you is not, I'm here to open up your fist to become more integrated. No, we need to come in and say, thank you. Thank you for keeping us safe. But also, we need to, as that fist loosens, we need to recognize that and help that fist understand that while you've been protecting us, what you've been doing may also at this same time be preventing us from creating the integration that we need for greater psychological health. So I think it's important for us to be compassionate towards ourselves, particularly if we have been through trauma. And we need to work towards healing that trauma. And that's where we're going here, is we want to figure out how do we heal this trauma, because trauma causes a disintegrated mind. When we work on shifting and strengthening our mindsets, this is the process of integrating the mind, which we're going to be talking about. And as we integrate the mind, we are vertically developing. So there's two different ways that we could go about integrating the mind and vertically developing. There is a bottom-up approach, and there is a top-down approach. I'm going to just briefly walk you through each of these, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the top-down approach. So the bottom-up approach is just what it says, is we are allowing the feet, because when we are disintegrated, we have a hard time connecting our rational mind with our feelings in our body. So what we do with the bottom-up approach is we allow the body's sensations to work its way up and for us to be conscious of those feelings and connect with them. And even if they're positive, even if they're negative, either way, we're just wanting to connect with those. Now, some common treatments or some common ways of engaging in this bottom-up approach is we can engage in deep breathing. Meditation practices are helpful here. Therapeutic massage, horse riding lessons, doing this fist exercise, right? Because I had you connect down into your feelings and we made them conscious. How many of you have seen, there's an episode that was put on by, or a series put on by Stars called Seduce. It's about the Nexium cult, which is really interesting. But they feature a woman who had been through trauma because of this cult. And she's now working through that. And you will see that they were doing many of these things. Like they showed her going through therapeutic massage. right, as part of her therapy process, as well as some other things that are more of this bottom-up approach. Now, the top-down approach is just that opposite, right? It's starting with our conscious thought, and it's diving down into our feelings, emotions, fears, and commitments. Now, some common treatments for this is guided meditation. So non-guided meditation is more just kind of paying attention. Guided meditation is when you have somebody that's directing you to kind of reach down into your body and connect. Maybe do a body scan, right? That's one of the guided meditations that can help there. But then this is where mindset works comes in, is when we focus on our mindsets, is we are going from our conscious being and awakening to our non-conscious automatic processes. And so this is what I want to emphasize just to close this out here. How do we use a focus on mindsets to integrate our mind? And I might argue it may be one of the best ways to focus, because it allows us to awaken to something that is dictating how we think, learn, and behave that we previously haven't been conscious of before. Now, the basic premise for either of these approaches is the idea that what fires together wires together. And so what we do is, whether it's bottom up or top down, is we are exercising and strengthening long-range neural connections so that they can allow all three of these different brain regions to work more effectively together. So when it comes to shifting and strengthening our mindsets, I don't think that this is too different than learning how to count to 10 in a different language, right? It's not that that's the easiest thing in the world, but it's also something that all of us can do, right? All of us can learn how to count to 10 in Spanish and become fluent in it. So let me walk you through the steps of doing this. Step number one is we've got to have the motivation to do so, and we've got to believe that it's possible. Now, this may not be easy for some of us, but this is where we've got to start with. We've got to have the motivation to do so. So maybe for me, if I want to learn how to speak Spanish, I've got to plan a trip to Costa Rica, something along those lines. Then that might build up motivation. Then I've got to believe that it's possible. Maybe I need to talk to people who have done it. How difficult was it for you, right? And I think that's one of the things about hearing Lynette's story is it helps us believe that this is possible. Step number two then is learning the language of mindset. So if I want to learn how to count to 10 in a different language, I need to put words associated with the numbers. So uno means one, dos means two. Well, what's the language of mindsets? Well, there are 4 different sets of mindsets, and they all range on a continuum from negative to positive. And our mindsets fall somewhere along each of these continuums. So there's fixed and growth, closed and open, prevention and promotion, and inward and outward. And let me just help you quickly understand these, but I'm also going to give you some resources where you could dive into these, and I'll give you an assessment where you could see where do you stand on each of these, which will help you identify where maybe do I need to focus for greater integration. So to make these come to life for you, let me give you 4 desires, and you just kind of think in your mind, are these desires that society says are good or bad? So here's the desires: a desire to look good, be right, avoid problems, and get ahead. Right? Does society say that these are good things or bad things? I don't know about you, but I think society says that they're good things, because who wants to look bad, be wrong, have problems, and get passed up? Well, nobody, right? But when we have these desires, where is our focus? It's on ourselves. And these are the desires that are fueled by the more negative mindsets, right? And when we have these negative mindsets and their associated desires, we are in self-protection mode. And I think oftentimes we get here not because we are bad people, but because we don't understand better desires to have, such as a desire to learn and grow, a desire to find truth, a desire to reach goals, a desire to lift others. And these are associated with the more positive mindsets: growth, open, promotion, and outward. And if we have these positive mindsets and their associated desires, we aren't in self-protection mode. We are in organization advance mode. But it's not always easy to get there. This takes vertical development to get there. Because, for example, if we want to learn and grow, we need to be okay with looking bad, because that might be the best opportunity to learn when we fail. If we want to find truth and think optimally, at times we're going to have to admit that we were wrong. That's never a comfortable place to be. And so in order for us to get over here, we've got to vertically develop. But I think one of the things that I think is important to ask, because it's our external world does influence these desires, right? What does your environment encourage? Is there elements of your environment that you may need to change so that you could be around a situation that allows us to inhibit more of these positive desires and mindsets? So step 3 then is, once we put words associated with the numbers, right? We learn the language of mindsets. We need to awaken to the quality of our mindsets. And here's a QR code, you can pull out your phone and take a picture of that. And then it'll pull up a link for a free mindset assessment. It's on my website, which is ryangottfredson.com, which will help you awaken to the quality of your mindsets, and more particularly, help you identify which of these sets of mindsets may need greater focus in terms of your vertical development. And then once we learn where we are at, then we need to engage in efforts to learn this new language, right? So if I learn the words associated with number, uno means 1, dos means 2, what I need to do is I need to spend 5 or 10 minutes a day, and over the course of 3, 4, 5 weeks, I'm going to become fluent in counting to 10 in Spanish. Now, that's not a big deal, right? It's just about 5 minutes a day, and over time, we get there. And the research on mindset says the same thing. Here's a really interesting research study. They took a group of financial professionals. They showed and split them in half. One group saw a 3-minute video how stress is debilitating, another 3-minute video about how stress is enhancing, and then all designed to kind of give a different mindset towards stress. Then they tracked their engagement, their performance, and their blood pressure over the next 2 weeks. And those that saw the stress is enhancing video, they had higher engagement, higher performance, and lower blood pressure 2 weeks later. A 3-minute video had that impact 2 weeks later. Now, is this impact going to hold forever? No. But if we stack interventions on top of each other like this, what we're doing is we're exercising these neural connections that allow for integration. Remember, what fires together wires together. So the basic premise or some basic activities that we can engage in to work out these long-range neural connections and create integration. Well, we can engage in deep learning, devote learning about these different types of mindsets. And I'm going to give you some resources here, and just when I wrap up, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of resources for all of these things for each of the different sets of mindsets. We could watch videos. We can engage in writing exercises such as a gratitude journal. I've got a book right next to me. The first thing I do every morning is my 5-minute journal, where I list down 3 things I'm grateful for, 3 things that would make today amazing, and then some self-affirmations. Then at the end of the day, I write down what are 3 amazing things that happened, and then how could I have made today even better? What this does, just 5 minutes a day, is exercises those positive mindset neural connections. It's caused huge shifts in my mindsets. In fact, I credit this journal for me presenting to you. Is if I had never picked that journal up, I never would have made the decisions I've made to be able to get in front of you today. Engage in discussions with our colleagues, with our family, and also we can improve our self-talk. All of these are like different workouts, a bench press, lunges, right? Bicep curls, whatever they might be. All of these are just different exercises to work out our positive mindset neural connections. So my suggestion is, as I mentioned, I'm going to give you some resources, is pick one of the mindsets that you want to work on and develop a plan for developing more of that, such as Monday, I'm going to read an article. Tuesday, I'm going to watch a video. Wednesday, I'm going to do some journaling. I'm going to do a discussion with a friend. And Friday, I'm going to maybe do some meditation or some self-talk, for example. I also have some additional resources on my website if you're interested in my book, Success Mindsets. If you really want to dive into the topics of mindsets, that came out about 6 months ago, and was fortunate to have that hit the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller lists. So that's also available. But as a whole, and to kind of wrap this up, is I'm going to give you a summary, and then I've got a poll for you. I've got a question that we're going to pull up here. So as a summary, our psychological health is critical for navigating our challenging external environment. To improve our psychological health, we need to focus on vertical development, right? It's not that horizontal development is bad. We also need that, but our focus needs to be on vertical development. And vertical development requires integrating the mind. Integrating the mind occurs through bottom-up and top-down processes, and focusing on improving our mindsets is one of the most effective top-down strategies that we can engage in. And so I've got a poll, I'll bring it up, I'll put it live. And the question that I have is, which points here was most interesting or helpful to you out of these points? So I'm not sure if you could see the polling on your end, but I will give you the results as those come in. Really appreciate your participation with this. All right, so we're up to over 40% of us have voted here. We'll try to get up to at least 2/3, and then I'll start talking about it. So we're at about 2/3 here. All right, so I'll start talking about it. So what has stood out to you the most is the winner here is to improve our psychological health. We need to focus on vertical development. So 29% of you who responded said that that was the most interesting and most helpful. Next was 26%. Said focusing on improving our mindsets is one of the most effective top-down strategies. Then beyond that, it was pretty much the same for points 1, 3, and 5. So great, that's great feedback there. So thank you for indulging me in that poll. So that is it for me. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll let Mihaylo step in here in just a second and kind of close things up, and I'm happy to play whatever role I need to moving forward. But let me just give one more closing remark, and that's just a huge. I think many of you have gone through a lot in your lives, and I just consider it such a privilege to be a part of your journey, and I hope that this information has been really helpful to you. And I wish you the best. Particularly during this holiday season. So thank you so much.
So at the moment, it doesn't look like we have any questions in the Q&A box. If you do have any questions for any of the presenters, please put them there. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. I do want to let everyone know that this presentation was recorded, so we will have it live on our website in the next couple of weeks. We have gotten really great feedback in the chat box already, so I'm happy that you all enjoyed our 3 presenters today.
And I am pasting into the chat box the resources I told you about. So there's 4 PDFs. Each one is about one of the different sets of mindsets and the different activities and resources that you can use to focus on your mindsets. So hopefully that'll be helpful. And if I have enough time, I could put in that video. I saw somebody ask about that I showed.
While Ryan is adding some more resources into the chat box, I just wanted to take some time to remind you all to put yourself first this holiday season. We've had a really tough year, to say the least, and I hope that you're all able to enjoy safely while putting your mental health and your recovery first. Thank you again for being here today. We will have another presentation in January, on January 19th, and that one is going to be a little different. We're going to have some interactive art-based activities to do during the presentation. So please do check our website for that information. That will be listed here shortly. And as far as receiving the slides from the presentation, we will post the video, so you'll be able to see all the slides there. We won't be posting the actual PDF of the slides though. All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so thank you all for being here today and spending your morning with us. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.